Hey guys, how y'all doing today? Just getting off work. Oh, it's a windy one, so I don't know what that's going to do to the audio, so sorry if it's like really like or anything like that. I'm getting buffeted about a little bit by the wind here. But on my way home, had a nice day at the toy store, bit of a slow day, which makes sense, you know, gets super cold. Things are, people don't want to go out. Why would they? We're here in Canada, freezing away. That's life for you. Oh, all right, what's banging around in my head today? Ooh, lots banging around, actually. Someone who's been commenting on my videos asked the other day, what's going on with Trudeau? Like, he doesn't seem to be making any sense. Trudeau makes total sense to me. And I think it's within the framework of this blockade, right? There seems that he's giving the appearance of inaction. And I want to be as clear as possible. Like, I don't support the Liberals. I don't trust the Liberals. I don't think the Liberals are genuine. I think that they are very clever, and I think that they know how to talk a good game. I think they're exceptional propagandists. Certainly a lot better than the Conservatives. But I won't get into... Well, I guess I'll just touch on what the Liberal game has always been, which is to use the extreme nature of the Conservatives as a way to get away with inaction. That so long as the Conservatives are unelectable, or terrifying, right? If the Conservative position is, I'm going to destroy the civil society and hand it over to corporatists who will abandon you the second they possibly can, which is their stated position, then the Liberals can simply say, oh well, we'll offer some small, almost completely irrelevant token to the populace that resolves some long-standing, should have maybe never existed conflict within the society. So for the Trudeau Liberals, that's marijuana legalization, right? If you offer the legalization of marijuana, well, that's better than the Conservative position of let's destroy the civil society. But the Liberals don't offer anything structurally important. You still go to work every day. You still work for capitalists every day. And the Liberals are not ever going to change that. They're not interested in changing that. They will offer everything they can, except that, in order to maintain power. But if the populace ever demanded freedom from the capitalist class, or the banishment of the capitalist class, as I believe we should be fighting for, if the Liberals were ever confronted with that as the electoral issue, well, they would not side with the populace on that issue, if that's what the will of the populace was. Because at the end of the day, the Liberals and the Conservatives work for the same people. It's just that the Liberals understand, they understand the populace a little bit better. They understand how to be better propagandists. They're better hustlers. The Conservative game is just the big money game. They just bow to the will of the corporate party. The corporations fund huge initiatives to lie. And they're not subtle about it, which is why their propaganda is so easy to dismantle. It's just that all they do is pound on the drum so loudly and so longly that people start to believe, or at least it starts to seep into the narrative. But all they're doing is screaming from the top of a big pile of money. And it's the second you realize that, and you just assume that anything that comes out of right-wing or conservative sources is a lie, or at least is designed to completely obfuscate the truth, then you can see through it pretty quickly. So, for example, one of the big talking points that's coming out of the right wing about why the pipelines are actually good is that, oh, we're selling the natural gas to China which replaces their coal and is actually better for the environment. Which, that's a fine argument if you're gullible. But what will actually happen, and what China will actually do, is they will just continue burning the coal, and then they will also burn the natural gas. So, not an improvement. It's a talking point that comes straight out of the mouth of billionaire oil barons to try and sucker you into continue allowing them to mine fossil fuels. There's no mystery, right? But if you're gullible, or if you think that these people are capable of telling you the truth, you might fall for it. Anyway, whereas the liberals are trying to play a shell game of support, right? They consider themselves sort of the compromise candidates, or the compromised people, which works when people can be compromised with. But we're in a period of extreme eco-fascism, right? The right-wing party is an eco-fascist party. There's just no other way to describe it. They want the country to burn to the ground. Like, the line I've been saying to a lot of these anti-blockade people are like, oh wow, you're getting like really mad at people who are doing the blockade, but they're just giving you a taste of what's gonna come, right? Are you mad because they're making the disaster happen slightly early? Are you mad because because instead of a wholesale disaster where the forests are all on fire and we're in a major crisis emergency, instead of that it's just like this little minor nuisance? Is that the problem? Right? The problem is that it's instead of a full-scale red alert, we have to formulate some kind of militarized heavy plan, create evacuations, sacrifice small rural towns that are surrounded by forests. Instead of that, it's just like, oh, some guy's burning some tires on the railways. Oh, what a problem. Yeah, you see how mad these eco-fascists get about that, right? So they're getting so mad because people are lighting some tires on fire on some railways, and they're losing their minds about that. What do you think these guys are going to do when the forests start to burn? What do you think that's going to look like? What kind of authoritarian nonsense is going to be unleashed when that nonsense starts kicking up? Anyway, so the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau specifically. Justin Trudeau is kind of an empty shell, right? Let's talk very specifically about Justin Trudeau, because that was the question that was asked at the beginning. Justin Trudeau specifically is kind of just an empty shell, right? He's been groomed. He's the face of the party, but he's not the brain or the heart or any of that kind of stuff. He's just the face, right? He goes where he's told to go. He says the lines that he's told to say. That is the extent of his participation in the Liberal Party. He doesn't offer ideas. He's not coming forward with solutions. He's not interested in any of that. The Liberal Party put him up because they had been completely decimated after they tried to put up Ignatieff, who the populace's response to Ignatieff was, well, if you're going to give us a hard right conservative, we might as well vote for the hard right conservative party, Stephen Harper. And it's not that Stephen Harper's support went up, it's that the Liberal Party collapsed completely. And people just didn't show up. Because why would they? What were the Liberals offering? Literally nothing. And so they put up Justin Trudeau. And the Conservative response to Justin Trudeau's presence in the first election was interesting. Remember, he's just not ready. Remember that? That's a complete concession that the rule of Justin Trudeau was inevitable. That maybe we can beat him in this election, but it is inevitable that he will win an election. The Conservatives were well aware that Justin Trudeau has been groomed. He's essentially a prince. He's got the Trudeau name. But at the end of the day, Justin Trudeau is a drama teacher. He looks pretty, right? He looks good in front of a camera. But his dad was like a lawyer, a high level lawyer who fought to create the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for Canadians, right? Like, that's a bold, difficult idea, something really hard to have gotten done. And Pierre Trudeau did that. Can you imagine Justin Trudeau doing something similar? I can't, right? Marijuana legalization ends up being pretty easy, right? You don't need to make a big and even then they haven't done it correctly. Even then, like, where's the full-scale pardons, right? This pardon system they created is a joke. Anyway, so at the end of the day, Justin Trudeau is in it for himself. He's in it not to spread a big idea, not to have a big plan, not to do any of that kind of stuff. He's there to control the optics for the Liberal Party. So they'll send him to a climate change rally. They'll send him to a pride rally. They'll send him to these places because that's good for their optics. It's good to show that they support these things. But you know who else they actually support? And they support pretty heartily? The fossil fuel industry. They support the fossil fuel industry, the Liberals, and Justin Trudeau as much as the Conservatives do. The Liberals bought a pipeline. The Liberals have every intent. They haven't cut any oil subsidies. The carbon tax that they have put forward, which is their sort of gold star of climate change combat, they don't apply to the fossil fuel industry. They've done literally nothing to take on the fossil fuel industry, except through propaganda, right? They're well marketed. They marketed themselves as fighters for climate change, to be on the side of climate change. And I think, ideologically speaking, Justin Trudeau does think, hey, yeah, like, climate change is bad, gotta do something about it. But instead of actually formulating a plan that excludes the billionaire class that's working overtime to abandon us, and instead of formulating a plan that is bold, strong, has faith in the Canadian people, looks at the situation and says, we need to do some serious moves. We need to show the rest of the world how to lead on this issue. Instead of doing any of that, he's just, he's looking at the oil industry and he's saying to the fossil fuel industry, how do you guys want to solve this problem? And that's like looking at a junkie who has like a heroin problem and saying, okay, you've got a heroin problem. How do you want to resolve this heroin problem? And the heroin user looking at you and being like, well, I want to do heroin about it. And, you know, Justin Trudeau goes, oh, okay, we'll just do heroin about it. And as long as the optics on it matter, right? So now the blockade issue is a major problem for Justin Trudeau, because his whole existence as a politician has been one of optics. He's not actually interested in doing anything. He's interested in making you believe that he's doing something. So here's a situation where part of his coalition, part of the support that he has, is environmentalists. Part of it is Indigenous rights. Part of it is business interests, right? And so the blockade issue is a real problem for Justin Trudeau, because if he doesn't thread this needle well, he loses the next election. And he's aware of that, right? Let's say he decides to go full fascist, the way that the Conservative Party is already espousing, right? If we had conservative leadership in power, they would just go full fascist. They would go in, clear out these protesters, forget about indigenous land rights, who cares about them? They would clear all that out using military force, using the RCMP, who was created for that purpose. That's the reason the RCMP exists, is to clear out indigenous lands, indigenous people from their lands. That's what they did in the 60s and the 60s scoop. It's not news. It's not controversial. So let's say Justin Trudeau did that. Well, then he loses support on the left completely, right? The environmental movement is done with him. That's over. The indigenous rights people are done with him. That's over. And they'll move on to someone else. And that's the end of his political career, right? That's it for Justin Trudeau. So he can't do that. But he can't just go full lefty, right? He can't just be like, okay, we're going to, over the next 10 years, we're going to reduce the subsidies we give to the fossil fuel industry by 10% per year. And we're going to take that money and we're going to put it into green energy programs so that in 10 years' time, there will be 0% fossil fuel subsidies. And all of those subsidies will have gone into green energy. There's a plan. There's a legitimate plan that has teeth on it, to say to the fossil fuel industry, look, we're not going to abandon you outright the way that you want to abandon everybody else. We're not, we're not like you. We're better. We're not going to, but we are going to create hard lines and say, hey, time to get off this, time to move away. That would be a more leftist position to take. Instead, the liberals are basically moderate right, essentially. The conservatives have gone far right fascist, so the liberals exist in like this kind of right-wing kind of capacity. If they were a left-wing, they would actually be reducing fossil fuel subsidies, increasing subsidies for green energy programs. They would be doing something like a basic income to answer the question of like, well, what are you going to do about people who get laid off? What are you going to do about people who have their lives disrupted? Well, you know what you do? You form a basic income. You give them quantitative easing, right? I don't understand why we love the idea of dumping money onto billionaires and millionaires when they need to be bailed out by the government. But heaven forbid we bail out workers who we have to displace. Right? Heaven forbid we just do the same thing, but instead of a billionaire or a millionaire, it's a person. It's just a regular person who's just working their life. Anyway, so this is the problem that Justin Trudeau finds. If he goes that far left, well, then he loses support from the business class who funds him, right? So he's in a real lose-lose sort of situation here because he exists in this kind of middle ground position. But the problem with the middle ground position, as I mentioned at the start of this, is that sometimes there are positions that you cannot compromise on, right? If somebody stands up and says, let's do a genocide on the First Nations people, for example. Okay. So somebody stands up and says that. And then somebody on the left is going to say, no, we're not going to do that. Well, what's the compromise between those two positions? Are you just going to do a little genocide? Right? Are you just going to compromise and say, well, okay, let's just murder a couple First Nations people? No, right? There's no compromise on that position. And this is the way of it with climate change. There's no compromise on climate change. Notice the dead silence in the media, by the way. The media is working very closely with the Liberal Party on this. It's very obvious. It has to be a First Nations issue. It has to be a First Nations issue. It has to be a land rights issue. You cannot talk about it as a climate change issue. You are not allowed to talk about it as a climate change issue. I watched The Agenda with Steve Paikin, and he's actually pretty good. I actually like him a lot. But he had a whole panel of people, Not one of them was actually a protester. Not one of them was actually a person who was, you know, putting their teeth into the issue, getting on the ground. They were all like lawyers and land rights people who talked about the issue as a land rights issue. The media cannot talk about this issue as a climate change issue, because if they talk about it as a climate change issue, then the populace is going to swing in support of the blockades and in support of the protesters. Because right now the populace believes that it's a land rights issue, and they're treating it that way. Meanwhile, you know, climate change is obviously the issue. That's obviously what we need to be talking about. And if we were taking that issue seriously, the support for these blockades might look a lot different. Right? Always remember, Australia burnt down. We can burn down too. And we will, if we continue letting these guys play this sucker game with us. And if we continue being suckered in to this nonsense narrative that they're creating. We have to look at these guys and we have to say to them outright, you must start moving on climate change. We will shut this place down. And the people that complain about the blockades, well, that's just the taste. Right now you can complain at people and you can say, oh, we should lock them up. Well, you can't lock up a wildfire. Enjoy your taste. Have a good one, guys. I love you all. Good luck out there. Share this video around. Have a good one.